Well, welcome everybody to the Design Resiliency panel. We're here today to talk about how to respond to all the challenges that we are confronting on the island and how collaborations could occur between the 3.2 million Puerto Ricans on the island and the 5.5 million Puerto Ricans in the United States. Puerto Rico needs solutions. Sometimes I understand that resilience is a very passive term, although it's the term of favor right now, but I do think that resilience implies that you are able to, after some event that destabilizes your situation, somehow you're able to pop back to where you were before. And the difficult situation in Puerto Rico is popping back to where we were before isn't the solution. Where we were prior to the storms is a profoundly difficult situation where we were already going through a sustained contracted economy, population exodus, we're a biodiversity hotspot in danger of warming waters, which means that we're going to be receiving more and more perfect storms over a period of time as the climate change takes place. So there are many challenges that we were confronting before the storms, and the impact is very evident in the built environment because with the contracted economy and the population exodus, we have dying cities, a lot of empty buildings that to date there isn't some collective strategy to see how we can reactivate that inventory, and could we pair all these families who lost their homes after the storms with this inventory. Also, we're also facing the situation post the hurricanes where designers, public officials have to face the challenge and have the courage to actually address these challenges of whether or not we should be reconstructing the homes of families that are in areas that are at risk, and whether or not we can find ways to relocate these families and have creative and inventive ways of turning these territories into other productive areas that don't necessarily get settled once again. And with the North, that we keep our citizens safe, and how all of this can happen using the knowledge from the mainland and our public officials on the island, and how we could all come together and find inventive solutions for the challenges we have ahead, of not necessarily going back to where we were before the storm, but addressing the collection of situations that we had leading up to the storm. Can we go to another place, a higher level of intervention? With that said, I'm going to present our panelists. We'll start with Nancy Clark. She's the program coordinator of Global Lab UF at the School of Architecture in Gainesville, and also director of the Center of Hydro-Generated Urbanism from the College of Design, Construction, and Planning at the University of Architecture. So Nancy, the floor is yours.
Oh, so are we giving our presentations now, or are we just giving a brief introduction to ourselves? Because I thought it might be good for Martha to start.
All right. Okay.
We can give an overview of what I was going to add to, so if you don't mind.
Okay, so we'll start with Martha Cohen, who's also director of the Center for Hydro-Generated Urbanism at the College of Design, Construction, and Planning in Gainesville, and we're also partners in crime. She with Nancy and with myself that we offered an international workshop in Puerto Rico in March, and some of the people in the audience here were with us in March. So Martha?
Okay, well, thank you, Anna, for hosting this session and explaining what our purposes are. I have prepared a short PowerPoint, but let me start by saying that it's an extraordinary opportunity that designers have the unique time to work on. We have seen this in maybe Barcelona, we have seen this in Curitiba, we have seen this in Montevideo, in other places where designers and planners can come into actually generate meaningful proposals that can be discussed in real time with the municipalities and the stakeholders and the population. So we were in the aftermath of the hurricane, we were lucky enough to bring 9 scholars, 2 professors and some students, to Gainesville, Florida, to actually start thinking about what we could do and what we collaborated in and what coalesced into this Puerto Rico Restart workshops. So if I can...
Is the mouse?
The mouse works? I don't know. I can't look at the back. Okay. So I'll change places with you, if you don't mind. So it's an inclusive methodology to quickly arriving to visuals, but that are consulted with the students, the professors, the stakeholders in the place. Doesn't come.
You want to do a slideshow?
That's exactly what we should be doing. Okay. Okay. So we partner with interesting organizations. Among them, I must say, the UNESCO Chair for Sustainable Urban Quality and Culture. That was a great supporter of this activity. We established fundraising and sponsorship opportunities and gathered interdisciplinary contributions. We're able to take an important group of students from our universities and from European universities that had already worked with the University of Puerto Rico, like the University of Sevilla. We did this preparatory exercises. We went through the sites. We especially emphasize to try to identify paradigmatic situations that are in the interfaces between jurisdictions of people that are looking into infrastructure and transportation, but also with human settlements, with climate, etc. So we see design as a synthetic activity that is able to coalesce all these interdisciplinary and reality-driven factors into the proposals for discussions. We brought interesting juries. We developed in those 10 days important projects in the labs. I must say these, I'm gonna just quickly go through the labs that we thematized together with the academic committee that was established in UPR. And the emergency course is to say, after having identified with New York Institute of Technology graphics, the most hit places, and we have a list of 100 or 200 places where there is the need to provide those shelters for the next events. And we developed 6 typologies of these during the workshop. And one is for logistics, one is for community information, or medical, or energies, and we can mix them up. And these are to be located these are some visuals, which is what I'm talking about, you know, I was creating the images of the projects that can be more easily understood by the stakeholders of the populations. And another lab concentrated on abandoned buildings, and we know that there's already a big number of them, 40,000 in San Juan. So we conducted studios that looked into that, finding new programs and new purposes for the already strong networked stock of buildings. We saw residential distress as a tripod of different typologies. On one hand, the caseríos, the government housing that can be brought to be rather a generator of energy, a generator of new ideas, beyond the stigmas that sometimes accompany them. We saw in the what we have talked all along in the morning, the different types of informality, be it buildings, tenure, risk. Another lab that we looked into and that Nancy will develop in more detail, is the rivers that were areas of flooding and possibilities at the same time along the island. 50 rivers, we chose one to look into more detail, and Nancy will explain about it. The encroachment of sensitive landscapes and floodable marshes by informal settlements, and also bringing proposals and solutions to it. And lastly, the identified untapped economic opportunities in the island that we were only able or capable of tackling or addressing to this moment. And that is, besides the possibilities of, for instance, the American railway tracks that are going around the island that Anna brought to our attention, the existence of the tren urbano, unused potential, or the possibility of establishing a fair trade fair to use in conjunction with the already big investments of the convention center and the hotel installations. So transforming the tren urbano in a transit-oriented development just requires redevelopment or development of the lands that are in the base of the station that is unused by the population. In our satellite in Orlando, which is City Lab Orlando, the students were looking, but not in the workshop, just after the workshop, into situations for housing displaced populations with the new proposals. And so this is not very explicit really as yet, but I want you to know that we have it, and we have been looking into it. Also, recycling opportunities, attempting to reach the small grain of small builders and young architects into individual homes and opportunities in the older parts of Arecibo or San Juan, or even thinking of how we could reconstitute a meaningful contemporary understanding of of La Perla with some new housing settlements there. So we are sure everybody can contribute to these ideas, and we look forward for in the future having other workshops in which the objective is that we bring to the table quickly elements for discussion by the municipalities and by the population. Try to be as inclusive in the generation of ideas as it can be.
And the work that was prepared in the workshop will be prepared and had as active participants the mayors of Loíza, Canóvanas, and the municipality of San Juan. So in the second meeting in June of the Diaspora Summit in Puerto Rico, we're going to be meeting and presenting student work to these three mayors and their planning offices, hopefully just to help them ponder other issues of how to protect their floodable communities, et cetera, and maybe guide them a little bit in the process of applying for this new huge batch of funds that have come into the housing department. Now I welcome Xavier Dejesus. He's the director of the Innovation Center at the University of Sagrado Corazón, specifically Nuestro Barrio, Distrito Cultural, Santurce, Puerto Rico. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here, and thanks, salute to the people that are joining us through the internet. We don't have a presentation, a visual presentation. You can address our work if you access our social networks, Nuestro Barrio, at Facebook, Instagram, or either NUCO, which is the center, Collaborative Innovation Center at the Universidad de Sagrado Corazón. I would like to address the audience regarding, I think, the learnings that we've been experiencing since Maria, particularly from a project that I am the director. Just to give you a bit on that, the center, the Innovative Collaborative Center is it's at the Universidad de Sagrado Corazón, which is located in Santurce, which is the highest density urban settlement in Puerto Rico. So it's the only university there, even though we do have in Santurce the Conservatorio de Música. Sagrado Corazón, it's the largest higher education institution in the area. So we've been there for 137 years. In Sagrado, we inaugurate this space, which is NUCO, which is the purpose of this space is to offer the university community, but also the community in Santurce, services to develop their ideas, validate those ideas, research those ideas, make the product development. We also have a prototype lab, and we help them accessing finance in order to commercialize that activity. That was the purpose of the project when we initiate the operation 2 years ago. But early on the game, we were also granted by the National Endowment for the Arts a grant for the planning of a cultural district in Santurce that start with the Sagrado Corazón area, which is a sub-barrio. Santurce has 40 different sub-barrios, so Sagrado Corazón is within the Sagrado Corazón sub-barrio, and we are also surrounded by historic zone, Sagrado Corazón historic zone, which was officially adopted by law and eventually by the planning board in Puerto Rico. In October 8th, we were supposed to, 2017, we were supposed to present to the community the results of a participatory design process in which we engage the community in Santurce through a process of building bridges, of placemaking activity. And we were on that for a year and a half, working together with community leaders, community associations, cultural assets, creative enterprises, local government, state government, And we were so happy that we were going to be able to present this to the audiences. There was an activity that was planned to happen at the Plaza Barceló. That was at that moment a very recently opened remodeled plaza. But Maria happened. Maria happened in September 20. The event was totally canceled, as you can imagine. And I will give you some details regarding that. And the project that we were going to present at that moment, which is at our website, www.nuestrobarrio.org, was a project that was very, I will say, limited to growing in a concentric way, growing from the core of the Sagrado Corazón sub-barrio, and then approaching in a very conservative way, and I will explain this, how to connect with the different communities. We were very concerned about the megalomaniac aspect of big plans. So placemaking was about doing connection and building bridges with the community. And we were very concerned about making too much expectations about growing into a larger plan for Santurce, because the citizens of Santurce have been listening to this for years. Plans for Santurce, even I have to confess, I was part of that problem too in the past. So at that moment, Maria happened and we canceled the activity. And a week after Maria, we were like, well, what do we do now? We want to promote a cultural district in Santurce. How do we do it? And then we start walking around the neighborhood, looking for the cultural assets, getting awareness of where they were, how was their places, how was the people. And one day we realized that, everything was changed and we have to replan our district, do a different stuff. One day, I think it was a Thursday afternoon, I met Alejandra Castrodal. She was a consultant for the Rockefeller Foundation with a project in Playita. They were doing a Resilient City program in Playita, and she knocked the door of the center, and she asked me, like, can you come down there to see what happened in Playita? And that was my first real contact with the problem that we were facing a week after. The area was flooded. It was part of a community that was still flooded. And we observed that, families they were, even though they were receiving goods and water from the Sagrado Corazón University, was helping them in giving them, approximating them to goods and stuff. There was no cultural activity going on. The kids were like, there was no internet, there was no access, there was no school. And that gave us a completely different scenario for the project to perform. And then we start planning activities for the communities. 2 weeks after Maria, we start celebrating cultural activities from 4 to 6 p.m., 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. And we will start visiting the communities that we were not thinking in actually including our first phase. We were going all the way to Playita. We started doing an activity in Cantera, Buena Vista, and all the communities that were in our, let's say, second phase of the plan in 3 years. So Maria accelerated our contact, but it was for great. It was for a great result because we realized that there was that our plan was still in a very geographical look and a very master plan level. And the Maria forced us to enter into contact with the community leaders, start planning hands-on activity, and give to us a learning on how to contribute directly to the cultural activity that at the end of the day, it's what really makes resilient a community and what really makes resilient a country. August 15, this 2017, the UNESCO present to the General Assembly of the UN a very important document that I would like you to refer. It's the first report regarding the cultural component of the UN sustainable goal that were adopted by the UN in 2015. And I will read the 8 different areas in which the project actually report. And let me explain this. In 2015, the United Nations adopt 17 goals that are driving the humanity to address real problems and to address problems that are, transversal to the different countries. Culture is not one. Culture is like, it's a transversal component. It's present in different aspects. So the UNESCO present a report that arrange and establish certain priorities to help and to drive countries to obtain a sustainable level, and it is based on culture. These are the 8 different categories. One, they are asking, or they are promoting cultural diversity through education and the media, including culture in social and economic and environment development policy and strategies. Third, enabling women and men to equally access, participate and contribute to cultural life, promoting capacity building for the development of a dynamic cultural and creative sector, supporting the emergence of local markets for cultural goods and services, safeguarding traditional knowledge and practice of environmental management. 7, promoting global awareness of the linkages between cultural and biological diversity. And 8, protecting and preserving cultural heritage and cultural property. I think that after, and this is my final statement, I think I've been listening a lot in the recent month about the importance of reconstructing Puerto Rico and the importance of infrastructure and the importance of rebuilding houses. And I think, that's a priority. That's a real priority. But I haven't listened enough to the word culture. And culture, it's the basics of actually us being able to rebuild. Rebuild an environment or restore an environmental component is crucial, but without preserving and promoting the culture of the people in a place, the rest, it's no sense. It makes no sense. And as you all know, culture is not being a priority in our budget. If you're not in a budget line, if culture is not on budget, we can rebuild cities, we can restore our natural resources, but we will not have a country at all. So I think it's crucial to be resilient, to pay attention to the role in culture, and to promote culture as a priority for a resilient future. So.
No.
For both of you, we don't seem like Latinos, for both of you. You're great. Both. Come on. Get them ahead. Let's get the Nice.
So now we welcome Nancy Clark, who is a partner in crime with Martha Cohen. She's the program coordinator of Global Lab UF at Gainesville, the School of Architecture, and also director of the Center of Hydro-Generated Urbanism, College of Design, Construction, and Planning, Gainesville.
Thank you so much, Anna. It's great to be a part of the panel. I was able to watch some of the other panels online. It's a terrific summit, and I'm really happy to be a part of it. So I thought I would build upon what Martha started to talk about. I was able to participate in the Puerto Rico Restart workshop in March. I participated as a design lab team leader, and our design lab was charged with the Louisa River Basin. So it was a pretty large territory going from the mountains to the coast. So I thought I could just highlight basically the three key issues that came out of the research and the key proposals that we have to start to think about. So what we did is we chose 3 areas that represented what we thought represented the geographic conditions along the river basin. So we had a Cabui, which was a site in the mountains. We had San Isidro, which was in the inland basin, and then we had Luisa, which was on the coast. And we knew that we had to look at the 2 extreme scales due to the site that we had been given. And we didn't feel like they were mutually exclusive at all. So we looked at the local conditions and vulnerabilities and met with stakeholders, but we also looked at the overall infrastructural conditions and vulnerabilities. You know, how could we, what are the common issues or connected issues along the river basin? And the first thing that came up was this idea of reconsideration of the water management infrastructure. There's been, of course, as needed, a lot of talk about energy infrastructure, but the team realized immediately that water management is also a key issue here to keep the communities, to sustain these communities. So we looked at the existing infrastructure and the maintenance of them. We found that, especially in our river basin, that it hasn't been maintained. For example, the reservoir at the dam was not maintained or dredged for decades. And so we really feel like that's a key investment immediately to make, because it was only half capacity when Maria hit. And the discussions that I had with experts in Puerto Rico stated that if it would have been closer to full capacity, that they would not have to open up all the doors that they did, which caused obviously flash flooding and landslides and sustained inundation in the lowlands. And then we also thought about climate change and sea level rise, and the fact that the amount of water that's going to be impacting Puerto Rico will require new infrastructure. But so part of the team looked at soft infrastructure. How could we introduce a new ecosystem that could help with water management? So we looked at naturalizing areas to create conservation lands, introducing or reintroducing wetlands. And as we were doing that work, it came very clear the second issue, which was land use adaptation. So, you know, there's this momentum for new housing, affordable housing. And so the idea is to couple that with some relocation and renaturalization of areas. So for example, in Luisa, we had a kind of hybrid proposal where we would re-maintain the canals that were created as a part of the sugar industry, and that would help increase the capacity of the wetlands near Luisa and reduce flooding. But we also looked at an area near the mouth of the river where there was a lot of informal settlements and not such great housing, and but we also at the same time found areas further inland in Luisa where we could relocate this community, build new, better housing, and create an ecological asset to the city and the community. The idea is that, you know, you have this beautiful coastal wetlands that could increase tourism and economic opportunities as well. And the last piece of the proposal I wanted to talk about really relates to what Martha was speaking briefly about, the emergency corps. But our team embraced that and thought of it as an infrastructure of community hubs that would serve to promote self-sufficiency, both in terms of emergency situations, crisis situations, but also as a part of this community. So in terms of crisis situations, this could be a place where you pre-position supplies that are needed during crises. And store them. This is a place that could be for shelter. It could be a communications hub, and certainly it should be a place where there's been discussion about decentralizing the renewable energy system, these could be places where that occurs. And then the last piece would be that we could use these hubs for what we were calling community-based food systems. So a food infrastructure that could be attached to all of these hubs. And for example, when we went to Kibui, we met with the community and some people in the community and stakeholders, and we started to think about what kind of crops could be grown, not just for their consumption, but possibly as an economic catalyst. So for example, gourmet mushrooms or special herbs. So there was an idea that these could be agricultural areas that community could sell. But when we were in Kibui, we also talked about what they needed in terms of daily life, because the other side of these emergency cores, which we were calling community hubs, would be enhancing the local community on a daily basis. So in Kibui, they said they needed a clinic. They really needed a solid waste recycling area. They needed daycare. So these are the kind of programs that could occur in these community hubs. The other thing that came up in Kibui was what Martha was mentioning, the abandoned buildings. We were able to easily identify existing buildings that were abandoned or underutilized, that were well located. And in our plan, we proposed to reuse these buildings so that very quickly, with very little funds and construction, we could have these hubs started already. There's no reason not to start these. And I know that in other communities, it's the same situation. The schools, for example, the schools that are closing. And so just to sort of moving forward, thinking about how to refine these ideas, CHU is going to be working for the next year or so on creating prototypical or paradigmatic approaches, strategies, and we're going to test them out in other river basins and other communities to refine the idea. So.
Thank you, Nan. So with everything said, I think it's important to jumpstart the Q&A session. Just putting out there that whatever is done in terms of design to help a community recuperate or actually go to a higher level of safety and economic development and shelter, a safe home and a safe shelter or a safe zone within their home and be prepared for the future in a time of disaster. I think it's important to reiterate that this is an interdisciplinary approach. Architecture and design cannot do this on its own. We do need the cultural approach, we need economists, we need everyone to work together because a building, a standalone building, cannot just do this on its own. First question.
I've identified two huge problems that Puerto Rico has. One is communications. Now, there are possible solutions to this, right? One is to launch our own satellite company, or license agreement with Venezuela, Brazil, other countries that have stationary satellites. There's a difficulty, there's a lag of 22 seconds because of the distance, but at least we would have communication to teach and do other essential things, right? That's one issue that we should consider. Another issue is when you talk about hydroponic gardens, be very careful with the use of plastic. PVC is cancer causing. So I see Puerto Rico overland, right? PVC pipes for drinking water everywhere. I was in Sweden many years ago, and out of the Special TV, Karolinska Institute, one of the premier medical research centers in the world, comes out with a study that one molecule of PVC that gets to your liver is cancer. There's no review, right? So years later, I come back, I go to the Rockefeller Foundation, I ask the question, do you have the study? He says, no, I don't have that study here, but let's find out, and let's limit it to liver cancer. I got 29 studies done in a relationship with PVC and cancer, brain cancer, you name it. Especially done in the factories where these products are made. There's also these bottles with cancer. You have to realize two things. Water is the most corrosive element in nature. Pure water. You drink pure water, take all the minerals out of the water, you will have cirrhosis of the liver. It will take out all the minerals in your body. It cause kidney failure and liver failure. Right? Water is the only substance in nature that can transform other substances without transforming itself. And so far also, you know, we have all these gadgets, all right? They're cancer because they work at a frequency of 2.4 megahertz, which is the molecule of water vibrates at 2.4 megahertz. It goes your brain. So we have to be aware of these issues. And when we do planning, you know, we plan around. We have to know how to do this.
More than a question, a comment. No, I like the three presentations very much. I highly appreciate them. And it was trained with the idea of smart and quick response. And I think the methodology that we got from the three of you, from the three professors, aimed at that in different ways. So there's no time to lose. It's not beggar dreams. You know, we understand the place, the locale, the culture, and we act accordingly with ideas. So as planners, as designers, I think that's the way to go. I would like to know a little more information on how do we get it done? Because the ideas that what can be done, you showed us that they could be grasped or produced rapidly with the people. And one thing is to have the ideas, the other thing is to have them implemented. So what would be your suggestions? Is there multiple actors? Is it relying on private sector? Is NGOs with the communities? I mean, who do we reach out to in the selection of the projects and to get these ideas implemented within the scenario?
I can jump into that. I think that I agree with you in terms that there is a communication problem. That's a multi-level problem, all the way from infrastructure, all the way to the social aspect of communication. So we have to address that transversally. And I think at the institutional and addressing David's question, how to implement and who can be in charge of that. Right now, I think there is a kind of paralysis after a lot of immediate reactions to solve problems. I think there is a paralysis in between ideas and capital to execute. In that gap, there is also an absence of institutional design that can address appropriately the implementation of certain projects. You have the cases, if you want a community to be involved and to be active and participative in their process, you have to make funds accessible to them. They have to be part of the governance of that process. And right now, there's no possibility of that because there's no organizational level that can address the receiving funds, for example, from an NGO. If a community has no organization, if they don't have a 501c3, if they're not organized appropriately, they have to look for an institution that can receive those funds. And in order to do that, I mean, those community leaders has to, I mean, pay a lot of attention. They have to cover their bases. And I mean, it's so difficult for a community that is not formally organized in the sense of a corporation, for example. So I think right now, David, I am more interested in addressing the issue that there's a necessity of looking at institution to redesign the institution in order to address the necessities and in order to implement certain projects. If we allow the municipalities, if we allow the governmental agency to be the only ones that are gonna be implementing projects, we will reproduce the same solutions without an effective way of introducing the people in the process. And I think that's a learning that we all had after Maria. That's something that I've been perceiving very vividly in all the groups and sectors that we are participating. So I think it's a design. I agree, and I think Ruth offered a great introduction saying that it's a synthetic activity. Institutions has to be designed. Just look at government. Government, when we speak that the government doesn't work, that they're not implementing well, I mean, we have a problem of design.
Or even worse, Professor, have you shared what you told me today at lunch? What did you say? This is an example. No, go ahead.
Okay, no, we were talking and telling him that the governor of Puerto Rico recently said that all the informal communities had to go. And the housing plan for the rebuild is being done mainly by the Developers Association.
So there you have a total contradiction from the values that you have just told us. You know, that you have to work with culture, with the people, in micro, like Nancy said, in microeconomics, in food for the people and food as an economic activity, in environmental restoration, in the complexities of design at all levels of scale. Here we have a clear, single-handed answer to say communities in the formal areas have to be replaced in public housing, which kills all the other attributes. So.
No, and each community has its particular circumstances, so each solution should be adapted to what you find. I mean, there may be communities that are in geographical locations that really need, for safety's sake, to be relocated selectively, or maybe within or near the community, and try and always sustain the essence of the sense of community. But not all communities have the same solution. So yes, I'm hoping that kind of invocation is for communities that are not safe, but that there is a more sensitive approach to communities. We have to market it. The mentality of developers and what has led the greed in the housing market is, let's make all the houses the same as quickly as possible, make the easiest profit, and the fastest way for a developer to make profit is to, new construction. But the art of reconstruction leaves in place culture, sense of place, and many aspects that through the architectural determinism of the 20th century, we already learned didn't work. You cannot bring a community, dismantle it, and replace it in Lloren's Torres, for example, without the alliances and the adjacencies that actually help structure their sense of place. So yes, these are important
also issues. You're not capitalizing on the potential of the population to actually intervene in a capillary way with small builders, young architects, to come forward for partial solutions that have to be funded. If you go for the big developers, unfortunately, they will produce these big plans.
I agree with Javier, but the designs of institution is important, but the vision of the people who is behind the institution or inside the institution is so important, because you can have the correct design, but implement. This is the danger, because it's so important that the planning is multidisciplinary activity.
I agree. I totally agree. I think when I said the design of institution is not that the institutional bureaucrats sit down and arrange a new way of being. I think it's actually disrupting the way that institution works. But in that sense, community and citizens has to engage into the real responsibility. It's not about going into a town hall meeting, said something and go home and then sit back in order to see whatever they said happened. It's about hands-on. It's about taking responsibility and implementing. And I think that's the kind of action that we have to. I think we're perceiving that in many centers. Last night we were sharing. There was these two professors at other panel that they're studying the Centro de Ayuda Mutua. They were talking last night at the dinner. And I think those centers are, those 8 centers, and I know a couple of them, and I know a couple of those leaders. I think they're the ones that are really rethinking what I mean with design, or designing our organization. They're not created by law. They're not sponsored by any official government. They're hands-on. They're just trying to figure out the how, with a vision for their communities, arranging the resources as those resources appears, and making a future possible. I think when Nancy was previously referring to that community hub level that they're thinking about putting in place, I think those Centros de Ayuda Mutua, I mean, they have that kind of mission right now. I think they're kind of happening in a sense in that way for their own community. If you take, for example, Proyecto Mariana in Humacao is, I think, a great example of that. But at the same time, you have projects like Enlace and Cantera that they were created previously. I mean, they've been in place for many years. They've been serving as an example for many of those other projects. So yes, I think it's about a different kind of governance that we have to
On the other hand, I think that the municipality, which we have interacted with, 3 different ones, and coming from other organizations in other countries, you see that they are quite local and quite small, and there's a lot of them, and that they have a representative value. So in a way, I see the municipalities as the bearers of this integration of different aspects, and you already have them. So it's like fortifying them, bringing them projects and subsidies and ideas to empower the consultation, the participation of the constituencies. But there you have an executive branch, David Governor, that can, channel funds.
I would like to add something there. I think that initially at some point in, I think the last session I was in, they were talking about the division between academia and these public entities. And I think precisely it's the community-based organizations and even academia, it's sort of an inversion of that relationship. So that, instead of academia existing or hovering over in some elitist attitude, it really is, we're going down to the ground, and it's a bottom-up leadership where we're sharing knowledge and sharing ideas, and one set of organizations, the community-based, do not cancel out the municipal system, but that, you know, somehow we just try and forge more constructive linkages where we can work together and elevate the intelligence of how we're using our money and how we're intervening in the island.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Jimmy Torres. I'm an activist in Orlando. But I have been an organizer for 32 years of my life, in 13 different states, you know, with a lot of fires out, many years. And I grew up in Puerto Rico from Bayamón. And one thing that we do in an organizing campaign is that we inoculate people about what the employer is going to do to the campaign. And I think we need to take this opportunity to organize the communities, but we have to inoculate the communities about what the political parties in Puerto Rico are going to do to destroy whatever you're trying to do. Because what happened is that for many years, you know, communities have tried to organize, and then 2 years later, you go back, and there's no leaders, there's a fight, there's people hurt, they're in their house, they don't want to see anybody, they don't want to participate because they take it very, you know, they attack them personally.
Yeah.
So I think we need to make sure that in all this project, we have some money to educate people about what is at stake and what it's going to look like, the fight that they're going to confront in the near future when they, you know, when there's like a couple dollars in at the table.
Yes.
There's going to be people like running tower and try to destroy each other. So keep that in mind, and I'm available to help.
I think we lost Nancy.
Yeah.
Jose Luis,
We have another question.
Mark.
Yeah.
I really appreciate what Javier said about culture. I know in the Czech Republic, a lot of people left during communism and then came back. What ultimately brought them back after the economy did start to spark up again was that the culture was kept alive and people remembered that. And it was, you know, one generation had passed, but you could see a lot of ex-Czech people, expatriates moving back. And Bilbao, Spain went through a huge economic collapse in the 1980s. A lot of people left. It's the same thing. You see the Guggenheim Museum, all these cultural things play a major part in bringing people back. So I'm so glad to see that. I know you've endured a lot of budget cuts for cultural and educational activities, but I'm glad to see that there's people championing it. Do you have a strategy for sustaining it for 5 years?
Yes.
Great.
We just received the, I mean, we in our project, going back to that basic planning that we did, we also look at sustainability of the project in terms of its financial viability. So we've been very active in identifying resources. We have learned to identify the right grants, create and generate the credibility with the federal agencies and international organisms to attract funds. So we are very active in doing that, but not creating a dependency on that. We're also looking at how we can be able to generate our own economic activity. Actually, we have 5 different pillars of the project, and that's like the 3rd one, because if not, you will be depending on the government all the time. If Trump cuts the National Endowment for the Arts and disappear, then your project will be affected. So right now, what we're doing is just using those funds to establish the foundations, but being conscious that we have to create our own viability in terms of that. So yes, I think we're doing that. And at the same time, if we are working in capacity building of those cultural assets and being able to reinforce the cultural and creative industries that are in our district, then doing that will reinforce the economic viability of the ecosystem. So that's precisely what we are doing. I agree with Ruth, and I think it's a shame that I still listening to in the radio and the media in Puerto Rico complaints about the municipalities. And I told, no, not you. I totally agree with your point. But in Puerto Rico, there is an attack all the time at the municipal level, all the time. If you listen to the radio, everyone is complaining about the mayors and the municipalities, and that levels of governance it's necessary, and it's more necessary than ever these days. But the reality is that if you sit down with certain mayors, they will narrate to you the difficulties that they're having dealing with the federal and with the national government right now in accessing to exclusively to information. So if you're sitting with a mayor, they don't have the exact information that they can have at this moment. So community, it's crucial for the municipalities and to the political leverage to help them put the pressure and attract those eyes into certain geographies. So I think it's crucial. And going to Anna's point in terms of the role of academia, I think this is a great moment for academia and for universities to rethink our role. Yeah. I think that if we step forward and if we, as private or public university, if we do the right leadership now, I think the universities will be crucial in the future of Puerto Rico. But we have to step out of the classroom. We have to step out of our campuses. We have to step into the communities, stay in the communities, don't use the communities as guinea pigs for our students. We have to do the right thing that the universities can do for their communities. And that's staying with them. In the difficulty, it's where we have to prove ourselves. And I think it's the right moment. I think universities, and I agree, I cannot reinforce more on this. I think we have to step out of our comfort zone, yes, and do what the society is expecting us to do.
Thank you for those words. I was going to ask a question to Nancy, but it's just...
Well, they're partners in crime. Maybe Martha can answer.
Okay, yeah. She mentions communications hub, and I was wondering, how do you define that? And also, another question is the local component of ownership in terms of some of those activities creating local development and enforcing that. Is that one of the aspects of what you get into as well?
What do you mean by the local ownership?
Well, it's related to the communications question.
Yeah. Well, I'll give him a general. When we worked on conceptualizing the workshop, we had these themes that we were going to develop, and one of them that we focused on were the emergency cores, which during the workshop evolved under some of the groups as these community hubs. So it was identifying all those things that the communities didn't have when everything collapsed, all the services and utilities collapsed. So it included harvesting rainwater, some kind of satellite hub, maybe a community hub, because many of these communities individually, they can't afford to have a satellite phone, but there would be this emergency core that could house, and it would be, so it actually, the emergency core per se is like a safe house or a safe shelter that could actually help the community get organized. And what came up during the workshop was that these spaces, if formalized and if it becomes a place where you could go and you have food storage and you have some kind of communication, even if it's 22 seconds with a 22-second lapse, but at least you can call your family and tell them you're fine, or professors can give their classes or teachers to their students so they're not isolated. But that this space might actually be able to work throughout the year and have other activities that help sponsor or sustain some kind of economic activity in these areas also. I'm not sure
Yes, and I was also going to say that one of the important things for us in this exercise is to bring international collaboration. And one of the groups that came, the UNESCO sponsored activities and the University of Rome, they have been working also in Italy, in the mountains, in the areas of earthquakes, and have identified the need to install these hubs in this in the isolated areas in the mountains, so that they become the guarantee of the communication system and the first responders to the reconstruction of the communities. So we were, you know, happy or lucky to bring that Italian experience that is driven by the government in Italy to advise us on these community cores.
Actually, I missed one aspect that I would like to stress: the fact that we are in a social work school today,
Yes.
and this is the setting of this meeting, because I think, and for during this past month, I even though I knew the profession before, and I knew the role that a social worker has in society and the importance of it, the university where I work, it has a department on social work, and we've been able to stretch relationship. And I think society has, I mean, architects, we have planners, we have lawyers, we have physicians, we have social workers. And they are crucial to be engaged into the design process, not just look at them as an implementators of certain aspects of the strategy. I think they're very, 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 very important in that resilience strategy. So I think it's very for me, it's very symbolic that we are here in a social school work, because I think that professional has a very important role in any strategy.
Especially in the conversation with the community.
I wanted to make you aware that the UN have developed something called the Emergency Telecommunication Cluster. And last January they came with a new challenge, identifying satellite, which have been mentioned here a couple of times, as the most important technology to be used based on their experience worldwide on the disaster. We're working with them. We're also working with the industry, the satellite industry. And we're the only local entity in Puerto Rico that has a teleporter is trying to develop a strategy to incorporate satellite technology to develop a resilient alternative backup system in the island. And I subscribe to everything you said, and I'm looking forward to work with some of you guys in this area, because we believe that in this, and unfortunately, the knowledge of how the satellite, that particular sector works, is lacking in Puerto Rico. And the federal government has it, but the federal government is not necessarily readily, you know, it's looking for the local government to request it. Right. That's my experience that I have with FEMA and other agencies. So it's important that organizations like yours incorporate these, and hopefully as part of it, and make it, you know, incorporate these points, because this is needed. Otherwise, we're going to have the same problem.
Well, I would love to take some additional questions, but the plenary session begins in 2 minutes. The idea is that you all know that you are here together and you connect and meet each other and meet us, and know we're on the island working, and we're welcome to collaborations at all levels.
Thank you.
And all work